Salvador, once labelled the world's murder capital, has been battling gang violence ever since its civil war. It's like the Hunger Games, but instead of kids fighting to the death, it's gangs shooting it out in the streets. Competing with Honduras and Mexico, it leads the pack in the murder rate. But hang on, Nayib Bukele, the country's president, has been making some big moves recently. Thanks to his handling of the COVID-19 and the fight against gangs, he's been tweeting about it, bragging, "We're not the same anymore." Walking through the streets of the capital, San Salvador, you can see the changes. Kids are kicking it in the park like it was a soccer tournament. Couples are enjoying drinks at cafes, and life is going on as usual. Can you imagine? Just 2 years ago, these gangs were running the show, extorting money, blocking the block, and even telling people what shoes they couldn't wear. But even with the big improvements, Bukele's critics are starting to squeal about him messing with the democratic landscape a bit too much. First, let me give you some background on the violence that is occurring in El Salvador. El Salvador's war came to an end in 1992. Signed peace treaties were actually political agreements designed to bring an end to the conflict, not to pave the way for the development of a peaceful society. These agreements were made in order to allow the guerrillas to join a democracy, not to make the nation a peaceful one. In the meantime, the United States started deporting young men from Southern Californian gangs who had criminal records in 1989. Salvador was unstable. There were a lot of orphans and extreme poverty. The new criminal element was too much for the fragile Salvadoran state to handle. They arrived here as gang organization professionals, having learned their trade at the heart of Latino gang activity worldwide. Los Angeles, California, home to over 60 Latino gangs. And things did not de-escalate any time after that. Those 4,000 deportees grew up to be 60,000 gang members. They are currently found in each of El Salvador's 14 states. Crime and gang-related violence was considered to be the main problems that the country is facing. Who are the most affected from this huge rise in gangs? Young people in rural regions, since the gangs focus their rule over those who are disadvantaged. In these places reside between 50 and 60% of Salvadorans. These folks are living through a war every single day. But you know what's more crazy? Young people who aren't in gangs and aren't even over 18 get caught in the crossfire. They're treated like members of a gang by the police, mainly because the gang itself may put pressure on you to join by posing threats to you. This ends up meaning that the adolescents are surrounded by two strong, aggressive pressures. All they can do is accept a life of uncertainty, imprisoned within their homes and pitiful earnings, or attempt to leave the nation in a search for a better life elsewhere. The violence hadn't calmed down until recently. There was a case when Mara Salvatrucha and Barrio 18, two of the most recognized criminal gangs in the nation, were held accountable by Salvadoran police for a wave of violence that resulted in the murders of at least 87 individuals in March 2022. March 26th, the worst day on record since the end of the Civil War in 1992, saw over 60 deaths in a single day. The victims' demographics range greatly, and the majority of them were unaffiliated with any gangs. This doesn't just stop with civilians, but the number of policemen assassinated by gangs is incredibly high, and it has been increasing since 2013. With so much terror persisting, more direct action is needed to be taken. In 2019, President Nayib Bukele started negotiating a deal with the heads of the three biggest criminal groups in the nation: Barrio 18, Sureños, Mara Salvatrucha, and Barrio 18 Revolucionarios. Along with other concessions, the gang leaders requested Bukele to improve jail conditions and reject petitions for deportation in exchange for their promise to control violence. There is proof that during this time, at least one gang boss was released before serving out the entirety of his term. Thus, the accord established a clear pattern. The government would only take action if the gangs utilised violence first, and provided the gangs did not respond, these actions would be brief in duration. During this time, there was a big divide among Salvadorans on whether the government was winning the war against urban gangs. Around 46% believe the government is making progress in its campaign, compared to almost identical numbers, 43% who believe nothing has changed from the past. However, only 10% of respondents think the government is genuinely losing the war. But with the abrupt upsurge in violence in March 2022, Bukele decided to take further action to cease violence. But before we go into it, if you liked the video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. President Bukele proclaimed an open assault on the nation's criminal gangs. Bukele and his associates swiftly created an exception state that allowed courts and law enforcement to get around guarantees of a fair trial and other constitutional rights. A 30-day state of emergency was imposed on March 27th, restricting the freedom of assembly and the right to legal representation. Among other fundamental rights, he gave the National Police permission to carry out mass arrests and warrantless raids. 1 month later, it was reported that over 17,000 alleged gang members had been taken into custody. With such swift action, the Congress decided to extend the state of emergency for an additional 30 days, and Bukele imposed a 24-hour lockdown on prisons that hosted gang members, imposing severe measures like food deprivation. The Legislative Assembly approved a measure significantly lengthening prison terms for gang members in the days that followed the killings. With such a force being implemented, there are now 16,000 gang members imprisoned. Bukele controls a supermajority in the legislature, and the administration decided to decrease the age of criminal responsibility from 16 to 20 and impose strict new sentencing criteria for offences involving gangs. A gag order prohibiting journalists from disseminating gang messages was also implemented. Lately, the government built a new mega prison to hold the nation's growing prison population and made about 70,000 arrests. That's roughly 1 for every 100 Salvadorans. The state of exception imposed by Bukele is one of the most extensive operations against criminal groups ever documented in Latin America, a region where the term mano dura refers to the region's widespread use of harsh anti-crime laws. Given the history of the area, we should expect such crackdowns to be ineffective. In Latin America, nearly all attempts to implement strict anti-crime programs have failed, and many of them have even had adverse effects. There is no case more accurate than Mexico, where shortly after President Felipe Calderón declared war on drug cartels in 2006, criminal violence surged to formerly unimaginable proportions. Up until the mid-2000s, gangs in El Salvador were a chaotic network of local groups, but brutal crackdowns provided them with the motivation and the chance to grow into powerful national organizations. High amounts of violence were released at the same time by zero-tolerance policies in Guatemala and Honduras. As these incidents demonstrate, Latin America's recent history is filled with failed hard-on crime initiatives. Surprisingly though, Bukele's campaign of terror seems to have been effective thus far. Reporters from the investigative journalism organization El Faro visited 14 areas in El Salvador that had been ruled by criminal organizations for years, 10 months after the state of exception was put into place. And guess what? The reporters found out that the gangs had disappeared. Also, these 14 localities seem to reflect national trends. 88.2% of Salvadorans reported they felt safe or very safe in a December 2022 poll, up from 61.5% the previous year. Nearly 95% of those who claimed that the nation had gotten safer attributed some element of Bukele's strict measures. It is important to mention that the country has made good progress to eliminate corruption. In fact, the Corruption Perception Index dropped from 39 in 2019 to 33 in 2022. So, can we say that the fight against criminals and corruption seems to be going well? Yes and no. Let me clarify. Things are going well when it comes to the elimination of gangs and corrupt groups, but in terms of democracy, that's hard to say. Bukele had long since seized, undermined, or eliminated any significant institution that would have otherwise been able to hold the executive branch responsible. In February 2021, Bukele's party, Nuevas Ideas, which he established and leads, secured a supermajority in the legislature. By September, Bukele and his supporters had dismissed the independent Attorney General, crowded the Constitutional Court, pushed through the retirement of 1/3 of the justices, and postponed plans for an international anti-corruption mission. Along the way, Bukele has undermined the authority of local governments and attacked the free press. He nominated his supporters to lead the Public Information Institute, the Human Rights Commissioner's Office, and other supposedly independent organizations. According to the 2017 Democracy Index, El Salvador scores really badly and is considered to have a defective democracy. A direct result of undermining democratic institutions in order to combat crime would be the massive violation of fundamental human rights. During the peak of the state of exception in September 2022, almost 30% of Salvadorans reported knowing someone who had been wrongfully arrested over the preceding 3 months. Nearly 40% of those detained during the state of exception did not belong to gangs. In fact, international organizations have warned of these far-reaching human rights abuses since the crackdown began. Should future leaders attempt to imitate his actions? Well, experts believe it's likely that they will only imitate the negative aspects of El Salvador's model rather than its positive aspects. When criminal organizations grow in size or strike with a lot of weaponry, governments may find themselves trapped in chaos. Presidents in Latin America who have not been wholly devoted to democracy in the past have nevertheless been willing to use any or all the actions used in El Salvador for political advantage. Fighting crime is an excellent justification. Despite its ability to reduce crime, the Bukele model has a high price. Beware imitators. Not only would adopting the El Salvador model prove to be futile, but it also has the potential to cause irreversible harm to democracy in the process. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to receive more content. See you in the next video.